Well, welcome to Christ and Culture. This is Pastor Jeff Short, and we're going to be talking again about the Olympics that just got over. I talked a week or so ago about the Olympics and talked about how, for the first time ever that I can remember, there were a couple instances where I actually was not rooting for my American U.S. team. I was actually rooting for someone else to win because of the whole mess and the foolishness that's taking place as far as the gender confusion and the LGBTQ movement and so forth. The first one was the women's soccer team. Their whole attitude toward this entitlement, understanding of how they deserve all these much more money than they're getting, and they're griping and complaining about their pay. And then also the fact that their star player, Megan Rapinoe, is a spokesman for the LGBTQ movement, and she is herself lesbian. And so she's promoting that to women and young women, especially impressionable young girls in the high school level. And it's just a messed up thing. And I actually was wanting and hoping that that team would lose, and they actually did. So I was good about that. And then there was the whole situation with Simone Biles, which showed me that here is a millionaire. This woman is worth $4 million at least, as far as we know. And so she's a privileged millionaire athlete who the network television and the media just pumped up and made into almost like a superhero. And then she went over to Tokyo to the Olympics and had a few missteps on the gymnastics mat and decided, I guess I'm just going to pull out of the whole competition myself because, I might embarrass myself. And I've been here before, and so I have to think about me and my ego and my mental health. And so she just oddly, strangely, this doesn't ever happen. She quit the Olympics, quit her team, decided not to participate at all. She's already at the Olympics, and she decides not to participate and focus on her. She said it herself. She said, I have to focus on me and my own mental health. And I guess the attitude was, well, I might humiliate myself out there. I might not live up to the expectations of the media and all the people around the world that think I'm the greatest. And she actually was thinking she was the greatest too, because she bought into that myth, and she started calling herself the greatest of all time and embracing that slogan, acronym. And the GOAT, G-O-A-T, greatest of all time, which has started to catch on now for a few years. And she has been called the GOAT, the greatest of all times, and she's starting to believe it. And then when she made a misstep or so in the qualifying, she goes, well, I guess I'm not the GOAT. I guess I'm not the greatest of all time. Maybe I'll make a fool of myself out there and lose big time. I think I'll pull out of the Olympics right now before it gets worse. And so she did. Very strange, very odd, not the kind of go-to spirit, give it your best, that we want to encourage in not just athletes, but all people. I mean, can you imagine just having that same attitude that she had in all other areas of life, where you are at a very important juncture? Can you imagine a general in the army where we're fighting an important war, and the night before the battle, he says, well, I quit. I have to worry about me. I have to focus on me. There's too much pressure here. I have to focus on my mental health. No, it's just totally absurd to think that we want that kind of attitude encouraged in society. So I had some problems with a couple of the teams in the Olympics representing the U.S. Well, I later learned that there's even more foolishness going on. After I found out that the women's team had lost to Canada, which I was happy for. I was happy that the women's team lost. I'm sad to say. I don't normally like to say that I'm happy for the U.S. team to lose, but in this case, as I explained before, I was happy. I later learned that Canada's soccer team, the women's soccer team, had supposedly the first transgender athlete to win a gold medal or a medal in the Olympics. I thought, well, wait a minute. So you're saying that there was a guy, a biological male, playing soccer on the Canadian women's team, and that helped them win the gold medal? I thought, I haven't heard anything about this. I haven't seen any controversy. It certainly would have been something in the news. And so what is this news report that says the first trans person to win an Olympic medal? What does that mean? And I started digging into it, and it looks like that she was born a woman, according to Rolling Stones. It says that Quinn, a member of the Canadian women's soccer team, became the first trans athlete to ever win a gold medal when Team Canada defeated Team Sweden Friday in the Tokyo Olympics. Okay, so the first trans, and I was assuming that it would be the case that some dude was declaring himself a woman and now he's on the women's team. But it looks like what is happening here is that Quinn was born a biological woman and grew up, but then decided that she wanted to be a he, and so transitioned from being a woman trying to now identify as a man, but she qualifies for the Canadian women's team as a woman, and so helped Canada win the Canadian gold medal as a biological woman who had transitioned into a man because she identifies as a man. So it's not as clear as it's very confusing. And this is one of the problems with this whole LGBTQ push that we've seen in the last 5 or 10 years, especially starting when the Obama administration supported gay marriage, and then the Supreme Court with Judge Kennedy ruled in favor of having marriage definition changed to accommodate men and men and women and women. Since that time, we've seen a floodgate of sexual perversion come into our culture. From a Christian perspective, when we read the Bible, it's very clear that God made them male and female, the very clear, distinct binary, and that there's no hint in God's word, there's no hint in the revelation from God in the Bible that there is anything other than male and female. And in fact, there are strong warnings and commands against anyone trying to confuse the sexes, confuse the genders, which are the same, sex and gender, very much the same. Don't let the gender theorists try to twist and distort things, confuse things. But we're still now grappling with the fallout of all of this LGBTQ push over the last 5 or 10 years. And one of the things that we're seeing is sowing the seeds of confusion in society. Because, like I said before, I was rooting for Team Canada to take home the gold against the women's national team, because I didn't like the attitude of the women's national team toward the LGBTQ issues. They were wearing the rainbow jersey in events, and they were promoting the lesbian lifestyle. Many of the leading stars in the women's soccer right now are lesbians. Some of the leading coaches are lesbian. The whole culture of women's sports is being swallowed up by this LGBTQ movement, and they're becoming some of the biggest promoters of sexual immoral perversion. And so I really didn't like that whole scene, and so I was hoping Canada would win, and they did. And then I found out, the headlines say, Canada's Quinn becomes first trans athlete to win gold medal. And so I'm confused. I'm saying, wait, you mean a dude walked on the field and identifies as a woman, so now he's playing in the women's sports? No, it's not that way. A biological woman was on the women's team, and she helped the women's team of Canada win the gold medal. She does not identify as a woman. She identifies as a man. And so I don't know to the extent that she has gone, what lengths she's gone. You know, Abigail Schreier's book that is being banned by Amazon and some of the other booksellers because it talks about the dangers of these girls transitioning and having their breasts removed and having all kinds of chemicals and strong treatments done to their bodies to try to make them look like a man. We've seen lately in Hollywood, for example, Elliot Page. It used to be Ellen Page. Ellen Page was an actress, Hollywood movie actress, and now she has changed her name from Ellen to Elliot Page. She's had her breasts removed. She's had that's called top surgery, according to Abigail Schreier's book, Irreversible Damage. And so evidently this woman on the Canadian team, Quinn, has transitioned into a man, but she's able to play on the women's team because she meets the chemical qualifications or the testing qualifications. And so now she's called the first trans athlete to win gold medal at the Olympics. Now that's confusing because it wasn't her trans state that was participating. In other words, if she transitioned into a male, you would think, well, then she would be on the men's soccer team, the Canadians' men's soccer team, if that's what she's wanting to do. No, she's transitioned, as they say, to a man, but she's still playing on the women's team. So it gets very confusing, and you have to really follow it in detail to find, okay, what is this person saying? There was another situation with a trans athlete that is a little bit clearer, but is still very confusing and is confusing a lot of young people especially. And that is the situation with an athlete named Laurel Hubbard. Laurel Hubbard is a man, a biological man, born a biological male. And he competed in weightlifting for many years and then retired. But then after his retirement, he decided that he wanted to identify as a woman. And so then he began to weightlift as a trans woman because he declared himself a woman. And so Australia let him compete in women's weightlifting because he declared himself a woman. And he was able to take drugs and he was able to suppress the natural male testosterone and get down to a certain level that is acceptable for women's weightlifting. And so he entered the Olympics in Tokyo this year as a woman competing in women's weightlifting. And it's so obvious that when he takes the stage, he's a dude, he's a man. He is doing what the Bible says you should not do, and that is, it says a man should not dress as a woman, and it says a woman should not dress as a man. And this guy is trying to pass himself off as a woman, And so he has tried to identify as a woman, and now he's taken the chemicals and the drugs necessary to get his testosterone down to the level of a woman to qualify for the Olympics. And the Australian National Olympic Committee was foolish enough to give him a position in their Olympic weightlifting team in the women's class. And so he gets up there, and he never once lifted the weight. He couldn't even one time lift the qualifying weight. Now, there's been some speculation that maybe his plan was to just get into the Olympics this time and just to make a statement and get people used to it, but he didn't want to press the issue too much, and so he deliberately failed to qualify. He deliberately did not lift the weight. He just wanted to be there this time to get people used to a man competing in the women's class of weightlifting. That might have been the strategy. So we'll see what happens 4 years from now. Maybe he's going to come back, and he's going to come back and then really carry out the agenda, which is to take home the gold or whatever. But it's hard to believe that someone like this training, a man training for weightlifting, would come to the Olympics and then fail to make one lift. It sounds like it was a plan to try to desensitize the world, to get them used to the idea of having a man compete in the women's Olympics. And so that probably was the agenda. And because it does serve as sort of an introduction to what they're trying to accomplish. And what they're trying to accomplish is the complete normalization of this whole idea of the LGBTQ agenda, the whole trans agenda, make it seem normal. Hey, this is old. I mean, there was a transgender in the last Summer Olympics, and so this is nothing new, nothing to report, nothing to get upset about. And so you begin to get people to come along to your bad idea. And the same way with this Quinn in Canadian women's soccer, this woman who is a woman, and she's competing in women's soccer, and there's nothing really new about this other than the fact that, oh, and by the way, she wants to be identified as non-binary. So she wants to be called they. And so the news media is so quick to jump on board and say, oh yeah, they. It says, when I was reading the article, it says that they were happy to win and so forth. When they're talking about one person, and they're talking about this woman who is trying to identify as male. Again, sowing the seeds of confusion. And we've arrived at the spot right now in our society where we have people who are purposefully confusing genders, purposely confusing sex. And for adults, this is confusing. What do you think it is for teenagers? What do you think it is for children? It's almost incomprehensible. It's so confusing, and it's an assault on reason. It actually is getting, not only attacking the very moral foundations of our society, Judeo-Christian ethic, and not only attacking biblical teachings directly, but it is attacking reason and logic and actually science. Because when you call someone who is born biologically male, if you start treating them as if they're a woman in all respects, so you let them run in the track and field events against other real women, and they take home the first place, and you act like that's normal, that's an assault on reason, logic, and science. Because these are not women. You can call them women. Laurel Hubbard is not a woman. He is a man. See, again, it's confusing because here you have pronouns that are linked to the biological status, the scientific status of a person. And now again, the pronouns are being confused. Then language is being confused. Not only is it an assault on language, logic, and reason, it's an assault on language, it's an assault on communication, it's a revolution in so many areas, and it's a bad revolution. It's going from clarity into confusion. When this gold medalist on the Canadian national women's team refers to himself as they, and people start talking about they did a good job. Who are you talking about? Are you talking about the individual here now that we were talking about, or are you talking about the team? Because if you say they did a great job in winning the gold, the language leads you to believe you're talking about the team, they, plural, third person plural. No, you're not talking about the team as a whole. You're talking about this one individual named Quinn. They did a good job. Well, then you say she did a good job. But now we're being assaulted in the field of language, and it seems like the academic and the experts and the scholars, they're willing to go along with that. They're willing to mangle and communicate chaos, all for the sake of the LGBTQ cause, all for the sake of what? Total 100% autonomy of person, freedom to say whatever you want to say and make up words and define words in your own personal preference. This is crazy. This is madness. Well, as Christians, we stand with reason and logic and rationality. And those would be enough under normal circumstances. We also stand, most importantly, with the Bible. And the Bible calls all of this foolishness. We don't want to cave in on any of it. Any of the LGBTQ acronyms we want to oppose because they're all wrong, they're all sinful, they all lead to social and cultural death and decline and destruction. They lead to confusion and mass uncertainty and instability. They undermine the church because they contradict the Bible. They contradict God's revelation. If we don't have a clear word from God about these issues, and we do have it, but if we don't see that the Bible is crystal clear about this, and if we're not willing to hold to the biblical definitions of male and female, then that undermines everything that the Bible teaches. Because if you're going to compromise in that area on this topic, then that means you're willing to compromise the truth of God to be current in the culture. And that's what it's all about for a lot of people. They want to be current. They want to be hip. They want to be cool. They want to be with it. They want to fit into whatever's going around the culture and society right now. It's like a fad or a fashion. That's why Abigail Shrier, in her book, Irreversible Damage, is so concerned. Now, Abigail Shrier is not a Bible-believing Christian at all, by any means. I don't even believe she's a Christian. I think she's a secular humanist and, for the most part, a liberal leftist who normally would be all in favor of this stuff, but she started looking at the consequences of this fad or fashion that is taking place in junior high and high school among girls, young girls. And the fad and fashion is that it's cool to now to declare yourself a trans male. If you're a young girl in junior high or high school and you come out as a trans person or non-binary, all of a sudden you get a lot of positive attention. You get all of these progressive educators catering to your every need. You go into the medical field community and they treat you with as royalty. You come in there, you say, hey, I was born biologically female, but I want to transition into male, and they just open the doors wide. They give you top surgery. They cut off your breasts. They will give you chemicals to increase the testosterone in you and try to lower your voice, registry of your voice, to grow hair on your face. They will give you everything you want because that's the LGBTQ power in society today. And Abigail Shrier said, hey, this is damaging young girls. Well, from a Christian viewpoint, we already knew it was damaging to young girls. We already knew. We can predict. Based on the truth of God, we already know this is wrong. We don't need studies. We don't need evidence from science that this is damaging young people. We know from the Word of God that if you don't follow God's way, it's going to end in ruin. And so we're seeing that. And unfortunately, we're seeing this kind of ideology coming from the Olympics. And the Olympics are being used to promote this. You should have seen the description of that Australian athlete, Laurel Hubbard, the guy who was in the women's weightlifting. The commentators on NBC were so careful to describe him as she and to applaud her, as they called, actually a male, applaud him for being the first openly transgender athlete to compete. Now, they didn't talk about this Canadian athlete, Quinn. It's really strange that there wasn't very much talk about Quinn until after the Olympics. I guess they wanted to give the spotlight on the Laurel Hubbard story where this guy is trying to pass himself off as a woman. That was the more severe sensibility violation. I mean, if you have Christian sensibilities, if you come from a biblical based background and you see what this dude was doing in weightlifting, women's weightlifting, that is really an assault on the values of Christianity. The woman who was participating in the women's soccer for Canada, well, here is a woman who was participating in women's soccer. So there wasn't that much of an outrage or shock because what she wants to think of herself, if she wants to think of herself as a boy, and she wants to identify as a boy, well, that's more or less something that is in her head or whatever she wants to make of herself. But the fact is, she wasn't violating any rules because she was a woman playing in women's soccer and won in the women's soccer. So what's the problem? With Laurel Hubbard, it's more of a problem because here is a guy who has a physical advantage. And Christians, we can say that. We don't have to apologize. We know men have a physical advantage over women because of their strength. And that is a bigger problem. So, but they're all problems, and they're all just confusing the daylights out of our young people. And we need to pray that this whole movement comes to an end, that it stops, we reverse course, and we see our society come back to God and common sense. I hope that's been a good commentary. We'll see you back next week on another issue of Christ and Culture. God bless.